The throne room went silent at the exact moment Alara Vale's borrowed wool coat dripped muddy snow onto the black marble floor. 100 wolves had been talking over her a breath earlier, silk skirts whispering, boot heels striking stone, silver cups chiming in gloved hands. But then the mark beneath her collarbone burned hot enough to steal the air from her lungs. She clutched the frayed lapel of her coat, fingers digging into damp wool, and looked up. At the far end of the hall, Alpha King Rowan Blackthorn had risen from his carved throne so fast the iron crown beside him tipped and rang against the armrest. He was taller than any man in the room, dressed in black formal leathers with the royal wolf crest at his throat, but his face had gone bare. Not king, not judge, just a wolf who had scented home across a killing field. "You," he said, and the word came out rough, almost broken. The bond snapped. It cracked through the room like winter ice splitting across a lake. Every wolf dropped to one knee. Guards, nobles, visiting alphas with gold pins in their cuffs. Even the old court priest went down with a gasp, his prayer beads spilling across the marble. Alara stayed standing only because her knees had locked. Silver light pulsed under her skin, right where the mate mark had appeared 3 nights ago while she was packing herbs in a mountain infirmary 40 miles from the palace. Rowan came down the steps toward her, one hand lifting as if he already knew the shape of her cheek. Alara's wolf pressed forward, aching, foolish, ready. Then a cane struck the floor between them. "Majesty." Elder Cashin did not kneel. He stood beside the throne in a robe the color of old bone, his white hair tied neatly at his neck, his thin mouth curved like he had been waiting for this exact disaster. His cane had a moonstone head, cloudy and pale, and when it touched the marble, the silver glow in Alara's mark flickered hard enough to sting. Rowan stopped with one boot on the lowest step. "Move, Cashin." The elder bowed his head 1 inch. "I will, once the law has been honored." A ripple moved through the kneeling court. Alara heard someone whisper, "Omega," with the same soft disgust people used for spoiled meat. Her boots were still leaving brown half-moons on the king's polished floor. Her hands smelled of smoke, pine salve, and the wounded pup she had treated before dawn. Cashin's pale eyes slid over all of it. "The bond may choose," he said, turning so his voice carried to the balconies, "but the crown must confirm. By ancient royal statute, an Omega mate cannot ascend as Luna of Blackthorn unless she survives the 3 trials against a noble-born candidate of proven blood." Rowan's jaw tightened. That law hasn't been invoked in generations. Because no Alpha King in generations was given an Omega for a queen. A few nobles rose from their knees too quickly, hungry for the words. Alara felt each stare like cold rain down her neck. Rowan looked at her then, and something in his eyes softened, warmed, pleaded without saying please. He saw her lift her chin. He saw her swallow once and stand still beneath the weight of the room. He did not see her thumb rubbing the tiny scar on her palm where the mark had first bled silver. He did not see the moonstone gate carved above the far arch shiver, just once, shedding a dusting of white grit onto the floor. Cashin saw. His fingers tightened around the cane. Rowan stepped closer anyway. "Alara Vale is my mate." Her name in his mouth made her ribs ache. "And she will be treated with respect." Cashin smiled at the court before answering him. "Then she may begin earning it at moonrise." The bronze doors behind Alara groaned open, letting in a knife of cold air and the scent of roses over steel, and every head turned as Lady Marielle walked in wearing a silver gown already embroidered with the crescent of a luna. Marielle's silver train whispered over the black marble without picking up a speck of mud, and Alara knew, from the way the nobles made room for her, that the woman had been expected long before the mate bond ever cracked the air. "Majesty," Marielle said, dipping low enough to be graceful but not humble. Her perfume drifted past Alara, roses and cold metal. "I came as soon as Elder Cashin sent word." Rowan's eyes did not leave Alara. "No candidate has been chosen." "Of course not," Cashin said softly. "The trial chooses in public. We merely prepare." Marielle turned then, and her smile touched every face in the room before it reached Alara. "Miss Vale, what a journey you must have had." "Not rude. Not quite." Her gaze flicked to Alara's cracked boot, the wet hem of her coat, the red healing stains under one fingernail. Alara folded that look away somewhere deep. She had spent years in border cabins where fever burned through children faster than candles, where alphas called for her only after their own healers failed, where payment came in potatoes, thread, or apologies. She knew how to stand in rooms that did not want her breathing their air. Rowan finally stepped between them. "Enough ceremony." His voice hit the walls like a door bar dropping. "She'll be taken to the Luna Wing." A murmur rose, sharp and startled. Cashin's cane tapped once. "The West servants can open it." "Open it," Alara thought, as if the place had been shut against rot. Two maids led her through corridors that smelled of beeswax, old stone, and damp ash. Neither met her eyes. The Luna Wing waited behind carved double doors banded in tarnished silver. When one maid pushed them open, Cold breathed out. The fireplace smoked when lit, coughing gray into a bedroom where cedar dust coated the window ledge and sheets lay stiff as folded paper. A tray arrived an hour later with weak tea in a cup cracked through the handle and stew gone greasy around the edges. The servant left it outside the door and hurried away before Alara could say thank you. She ate standing by the hearth in her coat. After midnight, a soft knock came. Rowan stood in the hall without his crown, snow still melting in his dark hair, a linen-wrapped loaf tucked inside his coat. "Kitchen was closed," he said, almost awkward. "I stole this from my own pantry." Warm bread split under his hands, steam curling into the cold room. For a few minutes, he was only a man sitting on a dusty rug beside her dead fireplace, listening while she told him about the border clinic roof that leaked over the medicine shelves. His thumb brushed flour from her lower lip. The bond pulled tight. Her breath caught. His did too. Then bells rang somewhere below, 3 slow notes, and he stood like the sound had hooked him by the spine. "Council blessing at dawn," he said. "I'll make them see you." But at dawn, in the chapel of Moonglass, Alara stood alone in a plain gray dress, while Marielle glided to Rowan's side in ivory silk, slipped her hand through his arm, and received the priest's silver cord across both their wrists for the watching court. Rowan's mouth tightened, but he did not pull away. Alara's fingers closed around the prayer book a maid had shoved at her. Its leather cover was brittle, stamped with a faded crescent. When she opened it, something fluttered down between her boots. A train ticket. One way. Northbound. Dated for the night after the final trial. On the back, in ink the color of dried blood, someone had written her name. Alara bent before anyone could see it, slid the ticket back inside the prayer book, and pressed the cover shut so hard the brittle leather creaked. Across the chapel, Marielle laughed softly at something Rowan said, her gloved hand still resting where Alara's should have been, and the priest's cord flashed silver between them like a small, clean wound. "Miss Vale," Marielle called, sweet as cream poured over poison. "You dropped something." A few heads turned. Alara lifted the prayer book. A page marker. How practical. Marielle's smile widened. Border girls are always practical. Rowan looked over then, his brow tightening, but Cashin stepped close to murmur in his ear, and the moment passed into bells, incense, and court voices pretending not to listen. By afternoon, the palace had learned how to bruise without leaving fingerprints. A guard directed Alara down the wrong staircase twice, until she arrived at the seamstress room with snowmelt soaking through her hems. A maid forgot the hot water for her bath, then curtsied with eyes dry and flat. At dusk, a box arrived in the Luna Wing tied with silver ribbon. Inside lay a gown bright as moonlight, stiff with beadwork and cut for a body narrower than Alara's ribs. A note rested on top in looping ink, for the moon feast. "We must all try to fit where we belong." Alara stood in the smoky bedroom, jaw still, then took a bone needle from her healer's kit and let out the seams by candlelight. Her fingers knew stitches better than prayers. She had sewn torn skin under lanterns while wolves screamed into blankets. She could make a dress behave. But when she stepped into the feast hall an hour later, the gown pulled tight across her shoulders, The altered side seems plain against all that perfect silver, and laughter moved through the room in little crystal clinks. Marielle came toward her with both hands lifted. "Oh, sweet little healer," she said, just loud enough. "No one told you royal gowns require assistance." She reached for the laces at Alara's back. Alara caught her wrist. Not hard, just enough. Marielle's eyes cooled. "Wine dark. Careful," she whispered. Then, louder, "I only wanted to help." Rowan, seated beneath the antlered chandeliers, rose halfway. "Alara." The room waited. Alara let go. "I'm fine." Her voice carried, plain and thin against the harp music. She hated herself for giving them that word. Fine. The lie of women cornered in public. Marielle drifted back to Rowan's side, all injured grace, while a servant placed Alara 3 tables down, below 2 unmated nobles discussing horse lines as if she were not there. The roasted venison smelled of juniper and pepper. Her stomach turned anyway. When the first toast began, Alara slipped out through a side arch into the winter garden, where frost silvered the hedges and the fountain had frozen mid-spill. A low growl rumbled from the shadows. Alara froze, one hand sliding to the small knife hidden in her sleeve. An old wolf limped into the moonlight, huge despite its jutting ribs, one eye filmed white, its gray muzzle split by an old scar. Royal scent clung to it beneath the musk of age. "Easy," Alara whispered, crouching. "I won't hurt you." The wolf came close enough that she could feel its warm breath on her palm. Then it lowered its head, pressed its scarred forehead to her hand, and folded its front legs into the snow. Bowing. Behind her, a cane tapped stone. Alara turned. Elder Cashin stood beneath the archway, his face empty of every polite line it had worn all day. His gaze dropped to the kneeling wolf, then to the silver pulse glowing faintly beneath Alara's collar. "Take that animal below," he said to the guards behind him, "and make certain the king never sees it do that again." The old wolf rose with a wet rumble in its chest, not at Alara, but at the men reaching for the iron catchpole one guard carried from the wall. "Don't," Alara said, and the word came out low enough that both guards paused. Cashin's eyes narrowed. "It is not your place to command royal handlers." The wolf's back leg trembled in the snow. Beneath its winter-thick fur, Alara could see the wrong angle of an old break, the swollen knot near the hip, the way pain had taught the animal to stand crooked. "He's hurt. He is old." Cashin flicked 2 fingers. "Move." The catchpole scraped over stone. The wolf's lips peeled back. Then Rowan's voice cut through the garden. "Who ordered Ash taken below?" No one moved. Even the fountain seemed to hold its frozen breath. Rowan stood in the arch behind Cashin, black dinner coat unbuttoned, moonlight caught along the hard line of his jaw. His gaze went first to the pole, then to the wolf, then to Alara crouched barefoot in snow-bright satin because the 2 small silver shoes had cut her heels raw, and she had kicked them off somewhere between the feast hall and the hedge path. Something in his face changed when he saw the blood at her ankle. "Ash hasn't left the Queen's garden in 10 years, Rowan said. Cashin recovered first. "The animal startled your guest." "Did he?" Rowan looked at Alara. The bond pressed warm under her collarbone, begging her to reach for him, to make him choose out loud while witnesses watched. She set her palm on the wolf's scarred head instead. "No." Ash leaned into her hand like he knew the answer mattered. Rowan's throat moved. "Leave him." The guards backed away at once, but Cashin did not. Majesty, sentiment is a poor substitute for order. Rowan stepped close enough that the elder had to tilt his head back. And cruelty is a poor substitute for law. For one breath, Alara saw the king the court feared. Then Cashin bowed, smooth as oil, and withdrew into the torchlit corridor with the guards trailing after him. Rowan waited until the cane taps faded before he crouched beside Ash, his large hand hovering, not touching. "He belonged to my mother," he said quietly. "Wouldn't let anyone near him after she died." Ash's filmed eye blinked. His nose brushed Alara's wrist. Rowan gave a short, humorless breath. "Apparently he has higher standards than my counsel." Alara should have laughed. Instead, the cold climbed through the torn skin on her heels and settled behind her ribs. Rowan saw her shiver and swept off his coat, settling it around her shoulders before she could refuse. It was warm from him, smelling of cedar smoke, steel, and the wild dark under his skin. "Come inside," he said. In the Luna wing, he knelt without ceremony and washed the cuts on her heels with water. He warmed himself over the sputtering hearth. His fingers were careful, almost reverent, but the silver cord from the morning blessing still hung from his pocket where Marielle had tucked it like a claim. Alara stared at it until he noticed and shoved it out of sight. "The trials will silence them," he said, wrapping linen around her foot. "Cashin, Marielle, the border alphas, all of them. If you endure this, if you win in front of the court, no one can question you." The fire popped. Smoke rolled back into the room and stained the ceiling in a gray smear. "Endure," Alara repeated. Rowan looked up. "I know it sounds cold. It sounds practiced." His hand stilled around her ankle. "Alara, if the bond had named me queen first," she asked, "would you fight another man for the right to stand beside me?" The room answered before he did. A sharp crack split the silence. Across the chamber, above the dusty writing desk, the dead queen's portrait fractured from the upper corner straight through her painted heart. Glass dust ticked onto the writing desk like sleet. Rowan stood so fast the basin rocked, spilling warm water over the floorboards and Alara's bandages. For a heartbeat, neither of them breathed. The queen in the portrait still wore her painted crescent crown, still looked past the room with those calm gray eyes. But the crack had cut her open from shoulder to waist. Behind the split canvas, something pale showed for one thin second before the frame settled back against the wall. Paper, maybe, or bone-dry plaster. Rowan reached toward it, then stopped when horns sounded below. 3 brutal notes that shook soot from the chimney. "First trial," he said, and the words landed between them heavier than any apology he had not given. Alara pulled her foot from his hand and stood, pain flashing up both ankles. "Then you should go watch me earn what your mother already seemed to know." His face flinched, but he did not answer before the servants came with a plain leather vest, ceremonial wrist wraps, and no shoes that fit. By noon, the palace arena smelled of trampled snow, oiled weapons, and hot breath packed behind stone walls. Alpha bloodlines filled every tier, fur collars brushing velvet shoulders, silver cups steaming with spiced wine. Below them, the moonstone gate arched behind the combat sand, a massive white curve veined with gray, dormant and dull beneath 70 years of dust. Rowan sat on the black throne above the arena floor, crown on, hands closed over the carved wolf heads of his chair. When Alara entered, limping just enough to make the first row whisper, he leaned forward as if he could will strength into her bones. Across the sand, Marielle waited in fitted silver armor, her blonde hair braided with moon pearls, a practice blade turning lazily in her hand. "I asked them for padded weapons," she called, sweet enough for the court to hear. "For your comfort." Alara tightened the worn wrap around her wrist. "How thoughtful." Cashin lifted his cane from beside Rowan's throne. "Begin." Marielle moved like she had been taught by men who applauded clean violence. Fast, polished, pretty. Alara moved like a healer who knew exactly how bodies broke and refused to make one break for applause. She slipped the first strike, blocked the second, let the third glance off her forearm with a crack that numbed her fingers. The crowd shifted, disappointed. Rowan's jaw clenched. "Fight back," someone barked from the eastern tier. Marielle smiled and spun, silver blade flashing toward Alara's ribs. Alara stepped aside, and the blow struck the wooden support post at the edge of the servant gallery. The sound was wrong. Not a clean thud, a splintering groan. Alara's head snapped up. 3 Omega children in palace gray sat directly beneath the decorated platform, their little boots swinging over empty air, faces sticky with honey cake. Dust sifted down over their hair. Marielle saw it too. Her eyes flicked there, then back to Alara. She raised her blade again. The post gave way. The gallery screamed. Alara ran. Not toward Marielle. Not toward victory. She threw herself beneath the falling beam, arms spread over the children as stone, carved railing, and winter garlands crashed around her. Pain burst white through her shoulder. A child sobbed against her neck. Another clung to her vest with fists full of leather. The arena went silent except for settling rubble and Rowan's crown hitting the stone step as he rose. Alara, Cashin's cane struck once. Forfeit, he announced, voice sharp. Candidate Vale has abandoned combat. Marielle lowered her blade, chest rising, smile trembling at the edges. Alara pushed herself up on one arm, blood sliding warm down her palm where stone had torn the old scar open. A single drop hit the sand. Then the moonstone gate behind her woke. White fire poured through its veins, bright enough to bleach every face in the arena, bright enough to make the alpha banners snap in a wind no one felt. The three children stopped crying. One by one they bowed, their heads to Alara. High above, Rowan stared at the blazing gate, all the color gone from his face. Beside him, Cashin's mouth barely moved, but Alara heard the word as if he had spoken into her ear. Impossible. Then the cracked queen's portrait, miles of corridor away in the empty Luna wing, began to ring like a bell. The sound reached Rowan through stone, crowd, and bone. He left the throne without his crown, vaulted the arena rail, and landed in the sand hard enough to scatter white grit from the blazing gate. Alara was on her knees with one arm around the smallest child, her shoulder darkening beneath torn leather, her bleeding palm pressed to the ground like she was holding the whole palace together by touch. Get the royal physician, Rowan snapped, and when a guard hesitated, he turned with a growl that made the man stumble backward. Now, Alara looked up at him, dust caught in her lashes. Not accusing. Worse, measuring. Behind him, Cashin was already speaking to three border alphas in low, clean phrases, his moonstone cane tucked against his robe as if it had never struck judgment into the air. Marielle stood with her blade lowered, face pale beneath its court powder, and for the first time her eyes were not on Rowan. They were on the gate, afraid of it. The ringing came again, high and silver, and Ash answered from somewhere beyond the arena with a howl so old it scraped the rafters. Rowan ran. He tore through the palace corridors past servants flattening themselves to the walls, past torch brackets coughing smoke, past the chapel where the silver blessing cord still lay coiled on the altar like a shed snake skin. In the Luna wing, the cracked portrait was shaking on its hook. The painted face of his mother seemed almost alive in the vibrating glass, and Ash stood beneath it with his scarred muzzle lifted, one paw raised but not touching, waiting like a soldier at a sealed door. "What did you leave me?" Rowan whispered. He pulled the frame down. The back split under his hand. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden between the canvas and wood, lay a packet of papers browned at the edges, some burned nearly to lace. His mother's seal pressed the top page, a crescent over a wolf's head. Rowan knew that seal. He had worn it as a boy stamped into wax on birthday notes and scolding letters. His fingers shook as he unfolded the first sheet. By royal decree, no mate chosen by the moon shall be made to bleed for noble approval. Omega, Beta, or Alpha-born, the Luna is recognized by bond, by ward, and by free consent alone. The date punched the air from him. 2 weeks before her death. Beneath it were letters, half-charred, her handwriting slanting sharper with every line. Cashin refuses the seal. He says noble families will riot if an Omega can outrank bloodlines. He has begun courting the Valemont girl for some future use. Watch him, my son. If the Moonstone Gate wakes, it will not be for power. It will be for mercy. Rowan lowered himself into the dusty chair because his legs had stopped being certain things. The cold meals left outside Alara's door. The cracked cup. The gown cut too small. The children seated under a weakened gallery support where no servant child should have been allowed during combat. Not accidents. Not cruelty drifting loose through the court. A net. A patient, polished net. Voices moved in the corridor beyond the Luna wing door. Rowan stilled. Cashin spoke first, soft and dry. You struck too hard. Marielle's answer trembled under its silk. You said she would attack me. You said if she used the old magic, you could name it treason. and instead she made the kingdom watch an Omega save its children. Akane tapped once. So we adjust. Mariel exhaled, sharp. I want what I was promised. You will have the Luna crown, Cassian said. And I will have a queen who understands, who taught her to sit straight. Rowan folded his mother's decree into his fist until the old paper crackled. The door opened before he could move, and Cassian stepped inside with 6 border alphas at his back. And the Luna wing seemed to shrink around the smell of wet fur, leather, and smoke from the torches guttering in the hall. Rowan rose with the decree crushed in his fist. You buried my mother's law. One of the alphas, a broad man with a frost-white beard and a scar through his eyebrow, looked from Rowan to Cassian. What law? Cassian's gaze touched the papers, then Rowan's face, almost fond. A grief document. Her Majesty wrote many things while fever took her mind. Rowan moved so fast the nearest alpha snarled and shifted one hand into claws. Say that again. Cassian did not blink. Cancel the trial, Majesty. Please. Stand before the kingdom and announce that an Omega healer woke a dead gate, cracked a queen's portrait, bent your mother's wolf, and changed your judgment overnight. His cane tapped the floor once, clean and quiet. Then listen as half your border names you bewitched. The white-bearded alpha's nostrils flared. My sons are holding the northern line with 90 wolves and a prayer. Rogue packs are already testing our fences. If Blackthorn fractures now, they'll smell it by dawn. Another alpha spat into the cold fireplace. I won't kneel to moon tricks. Rowan's wolf surged so hard his bones ached. You'll kneel to your king. A king, Cassian said softly, who still has a kingdom by morning. The torch nearest the door hissed. Ash limped between Rowan and the men, gray hackles raised. But even that old loyal body could not block 6 territories worth of suspicion. Cassian stepped aside as if granting mercy. Hold the final trial. Let the girl win cleanly if she can. Then parade your decree, polish your conscience, and call it reform. Refuse, and I will not need to lift a finger. They will do what frightened alphas always do. The scarred alpha looked away first. That was the worst of it. Not rebellion. Permission. By the time Rowan reached the infirmary below the arena, the papers smelled faintly scorched from where one half-burned edge had flaked ash over his sleeve. Alara sat on a narrow cot while a young healer stitched the cut across her palm. Her left shoulder was bound tight beneath a borrowed gray shawl, and 3 Omega children slept in a pile of blankets at her feet, like puppies too afraid to be carried away. She looked up when he entered. Her eyes dropped to the decree, then to the ash on his cuffs. You found her. Rowan shut the door behind him. The latch sounded too loud. She changed everything. Alara gave a small nod, as if she had expected the dead queen to be kinder than the living court. Then end it. His fingers tightened around the old paper. If I cancel the final trial tonight, the border alphas split. Cassian made sure they heard enough to fear you and not enough to trust me. Rogues are gathering north of Grapevine. If the line breaks. So you came to ask me to bleed neatly. He flinched. I came to ask you to fight one last time. The child nearest her stirred. Alara laid her bandaged hand on his hair until he settled. When she spoke again, her voice was so even it made Rowan's chest hurt. For the throne. For time, he said. For the kingdom. For us. I can fix the law after. Alara stood slowly, the shawl slipping from one shoulder. She took the decree from him, smoothed it once over the metal tray beside the cot, and placed it back in his hand as carefully as if returning a blade by the handle. You still think the throne is the thing that needs saving. Rowan reached for her. Alara. She stepped back, and this time the bond did not pull her forward. It hung between them, silver and aching, like a bridge with its middle cut out. No, she whispered. Tomorrow you can have your trial. Later, in the Luna wing, while the palace bells counted midnight over snow-black roofs, Alara opened the old prayer book, took out the northbound train ticket with her name written on the back, and began to pack. By dawn, the arena had been dressed like a wedding and armed like an execution. White banners snapped in the freezing wind. Moon lilies lined the combat sand in silver bowls. Every noble house packed the tiers, fur collars brushing jeweled throats, while the Omega servants stood at the back with their hands folded and their eyes lowered. Rowan sat on the black throne with his mother's decree hidden beneath his palm, its edges cutting into his skin. He kept looking at the eastern arch waiting. Marielle stood below in fitted silver armor, hair braided with pearls, mouth painted the soft pink of innocence. Cashin leaned near Rowan's shoulder and murmured, "A clean finish, Majesty. Let the kingdom breathe." Rowan did not answer. The horn sounded. Once. Twice. On the third note, Alara entered barefoot through the eastern arch in a plain white dress that moved around her ankles like water. No jewels. No armor. No royal crest. Her bandaged palm was uncovered, and the mark beneath her collarbone glowed through the thin fabric with a steady silver light. The crowd shifted, confused by the lack of spectacle. Rowan rose without meaning to. Marielle lifted her blade. "Sweet little healer," she called, voice bright and brittle. "Did no one bring you a weapon?" Alara looked at her, then past her, up to the throne. Her eyes found Rowan's. The bond pulled so hard his breath caught. He saw the woman from the throne room in the borrowed coat. He saw the snow on her boots, the mud on his marble, the chin he had mistaken for courage because calling it pain would have required him to move. "Alara," he said, too low for anyone but wolves to hear. She smiled. Not cruelly, not triumphantly. Calm, heartbreaking, free. Then she turned to the court. "I won't bleed for a place that was already mine," she said, and her voice carried to the highest stone tier. The moonstone gate behind her began to hum. "And I won't beg a mate to become a man." The words struck harder than any blade. An Omega servant covered her mouth. One of the border alphas looked down at his boots. Marielle's face drained of color. "This is forfeiture," Cashin snapped, cane slamming stone. "This is cowardice." Alara did not look at him. She walked across the sand, past Marielle's raised weapon, past the bowls of moon lilies trembling in a wind no one else felt. Rowan came down the throne steps. "Alara, wait." She paused beneath the moonstone gate, its white veins blazing over her skin. For one breath, he thought she might turn back. Instead, she touched the stone with her bandaged palm. Silver light swallowed the arch as howled from somewhere deep inside the palace, long and broken. Alara stepped through. The light folded shut behind her, leaving only drifting white dust and the faint scent of cedar, snow, and healing herbs. Rowan ran. He heard Cashin shouting, heard nobles rising, heard Marielle drop her blade into the sand, but none of it mattered. He tore through the corridors to the Luna wing, boots skidding on polished stone, his wolf clawing at his ribs. The double doors stood open. Inside, the hearth was cold. The gray dresses were gone. The healer's kit was gone. The prayer book was gone. Her scent was fading from the cedar dust sheets, as if the room itself were exhaling her away. On the pillow lay the northbound train ticket, torn clean in half. On the bare bed, his mother's decree glowed under a silver moon seal, words rising dark through the old paper. Free consent alone. Rowan reached for it, but before his fingers touched the page, the walls of the Luna wing shuddered, and every hidden moon seal in the palace began to burn black. Black fire crawled through the walls in thin, branching lines, and wherever it touched, paint blistered away from stone to reveal words Rowan had never seen. Amended statutes, false witness marks, noble family seals stamped over his mother's crescent. The palace groaned like something waking from a long fever. In the arena, moonlight poured down through the open roof and burned every forged law black beneath the banners, one after another, until Cashin's calm voice finally cracked. "Cover them," he shouted, but the guards did not move. The Omega servants were reading. The border alphas were reading. Rowan walked back into the arena with the glowing decree in his hand and ash smeared across his knuckles. He did not sit on the throne. He stood in the sand where Alara had refused to bleed and read his mother's law aloud, each word steady enough to cut. Free consent alone. Marielle sank to her knees before anyone touched her, silver armor clattering softly. "He promised me the crown," she whispered, not to Rowan, but to the moon seal burning black at her feet. Cashin lifted his cane as if one more tap could put the world back in order. Ash came from the western arch, limping, gray muzzle high, and pressed his scarred forehead to the decree before turning his blind eye on the elder. That was when the oldest guards crossed the sand and took Cashin by both arms. Rowan did not watch them drag him out. He was looking at the empty eastern arch, at the white dust still drifting where Alara had gone. 3 days later, he restored his mother's decree before every pack in the kingdom. He stripped Cashin's allies of their seats, sent Marielle back to Valemont under oath and guard, and ordered the Luna wing left open, swept, warmed, and empty. "Shall I send riders for her?" his steward asked. Rowan stood beside the cold bed where the torn ticket had lain and stared at the words still silver on the old paper. "No," he said. His voice scraped. "I've summoned her enough." Snow came hard that month. It buried the palace roads, froze the chapel fountain solid, and drove refugees south from Grapevine with frost in their hair and rogue howls behind them. Rowan found her at a border station 22 days after she walked through the gate. The platform smelled of coal smoke, wet wool, pine pitch, and blood-warmed herbs. Alara wore the same borrowed coat from the day she arrived, patched now at one elbow, her boots muddy to the ankles as she knelt beside a shivering child and wrapped a glowing hand around his fevered wrist. The old prayer book lay open on a crate beside her. The other half of the train ticket marked the page, her name dark across the back. Rowan understood then. The Queen's last ward had not sent Alara away. It had given her a door no king could lock. Alara looked up when his shadow fell over the snow. Around them, Omegas stopped bandaging, stirring soup, carrying blankets. Every eye lifted. Rowan removed his crown and set it in the slush between them. Then he dropped to one knee, the platform mud soaking through his black trousers. "I won't ask you to come back," he said. His breath smoked in the cold. "I'll ask what I should have asked first. What kind of kingdom would be worthy of your return?" Alara's fingers trembled once against the child's blanket, then stilled. Ash, who had followed Rowan all the way from the palace, lowered himself beside her boots with a tired sigh. She looked at the crown in the mud, then at the man kneeling behind it. "One that doesn't make me fight alone." Rowan bowed his head, not as king to subject, as wolf to Luna. Behind Alara, the moonstone gate carved into the old station wall woke with a soft silver pulse, and this time, when the bond snapped through the air, no one dropped because they were forced to. They knelt because she had finally been seen.